The Authors Guild Foundation is the educational and philanthropic branch of the Authors Guild,
America's oldest and largest professional organization for writers.
The Authors Guild Foundation educates, supports, and protects American writers
to ensure that a rich, diverse body of literature can flourish.
We do this by advocating for authors' rights,
educating authors across the country in the business of writing,
and promoting an understanding of the value of writers.
The foundation advocates on issues of copyright,
a right enshrined in Article 1 of the Constitution, guaranteeing authors the right to own and profit from their work.
We fight piracy and the theft of creative work.
We promote literacy and increased access to books in disadvantaged communities.
We advocate for increased funding and outreach for public libraries.
The Foundation believes that an abundance of free literary expression is essential to our democracy.
And that can only be achieved by protecting authors' constitutional and moral rights to benefit from their work.
The Authors Guild Foundation works on behalf of all writers, emerging, mid-career, and established writers in all genres.
Novelists and essayists.
Children and YA books.
Poets and translators.
Journalists and nonfiction authors.
Thriller and mystery writers.
You get the picture.
Through our many educational programs, the Authors Guild Foundation teaches writers the business of writing
and equips them with the knowledge and tools they need to succeed.
We foster and celebrate diverse voices in American literature
and promote the ability of writers to earn a livelihood so they can keep writing.
The foundation works to defend the author's right to free expression
and prevent erosion of the exchange of knowledge and ideas.
We advocate for strong, effective intellectual property laws,
as well as fair treatment of authors, so that writing remains a viable profession.
So if you love books, writing, literary culture, the written word, moving poetry, excellence in journalism, the perfect thriller,
please make a donation.
All of us at the Authors Guild Foundation thank you so much for your support.
Thank you 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 for your support.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Janet Dewart-Bell, and on behalf of the Authors Guild and the Authors Guild Foundation, I am excited to welcome you to this spectacular program, part of the WIT event that you all have been participating in. And I tell you, things don't get much better than this. I was honored to be asked to introduce two people who really don't need much of an introduction. So after we see this clip from the former governor of Massachusetts, Mr. Deval Patrick, I will come back and I will introduce tonight's speakers.
Hi, everyone. My name is Deval Patrick, and I am the former governor of Massachusetts, and more importantly for these purposes, a longtime resident of the Berkshires. And I am delighted to welcome you to what I hope is the first of many Words, Ideas, and Thinkers festivals here in the Berkshires. I'm so sorry I can't be with you myself. I was so looking forward to this. One of the things that we have enjoyed in some 20 years of living here in the Berkshires is the way this area is rediscovering its black side. Du Bois, of course, is a native of the Berkshires, was born and grew up in Great Barrington, and that town has acknowledged increasingly his presence and his role and his connection to the Berkshires by renaming one of the schools, most recently by acknowledging and investing in the renovation of his home church, the Clinton Street Church, as the Du Bois Freedom Center in the center of town. Alongside that, just recently, we unveiled in Sheffield, another town here in the Berkshires, a statue to Elizabeth Freeman, who as an enslaved woman overheard these soaring and enduring concepts of freedom and personal choice, and took her case to under our then new Constitution to the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, and won her freedom and began the end of slavery here in Massachusetts 70 years before the Emancipation Proclamation. We've learned that James Weldon Johnson would spend his summers here in the Berkshires and wrote the stirring anthem, Lift Every Voice, right in Great Barrington. That a contemporary of Elizabeth Freeman, a man named Agrippa Hall, who was the principal aide to General Kosciuszko, one of the members of General Washington's general staff, was a native of the Berkshires, was present for and survived every one of the major battles of the Revolution, and then came home here to Great Barrington, or rather to Stockbridge, and his home is being restored by private owners and brought back to the way it was when he lived there in the 1700s. There are so many ways in which this community is learning, in many cases for the first time, or relearning, that Black people have been here from the beginning, as they have been all over America, and as they have been a part of American history from the beginning. And so it's in that spirit of enthusiasm about your being welcomed into our own rediscovery, our own opening up, our own enriching of this community, that I'm delighted to come to you and to celebrate this extraordinary panel coming on that involves Skip and David, two of the greatest thinkers and writers about Black history and Black culture over the years. I'm so sorry again that I can't be with you all, but enjoy it. Thank you.
So, what do you say about two of the preeminent scholars of our time? Very little. You let them speak for themselves, but there are a couple things I would like to remind us of. And I did this in alpha order because I wasn't going to flip a coin. David Blight is Sterling Professor of American History at Yale University, joining that faculty in January 2003. I'm using cards because I don't want to make a mistake with David Blight and Henry Louis Skip Gates here, so bear with me while I read a little bit. Professor Blight previously taught at Amherst College for 13 years. As of June 2004, he is director, succeeding David Bryan Davis of the Gilder Lehrman Center for the Study of Slavery. He has many books, and I say to all of us to read their bios, which are extensive. That's almost a book in itself. They're books in themselves. But to really read, I know everyone here is you're all readers, so read the books. They have really enriched our lives and our knowledge, and they are truly national treasures. In talking to David Blight earlier, he mentioned that that he has a new book coming out. So I'm not sure that it's even publicized yet. Is that correct? No, it's not written yet. Oh. Well, you even have an even bigger advance notice than I thought. Being published by the Library of America on the public writings of Frederick Douglass. That's the one you were telling me about. Oh. You got to watch these historians. I think it's historians' sense of humor. And you know that one of his books won the Bancroft Prize. We know that, so that's really good. We know all of these things that he's done and the writings that he's done on slavery and African American history. Henry Louis Gates is the Alphonse Fletcher University professor and director of the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research at Harvard University. We know him from many fields. He's an Emmy Award-winning filmmaker. He's a public intellectual of the first order. He was one of the first MacArthur Genius grantees. He's a recipient of numerous awards, as is Professor Blight. So with that, I'm going to get out of the way, and I'm going to say, gentlemen, you're on.
Thank you. Thank you for that very kind introduction, dear friend. It's good to be here. It's cold out here, though. Damn, you know. It's colder than it is in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but it's great. I love coming here. First time I was here, every scholar of African American studies ends up here sooner or later in search of Du Bois, right? But the first time I spent any serious time was when I did Kira Sedgwick's family tree. And as you know, her ninth great grandfather, Thomas Sedgwick, who was Mom Bet's attorney. So it was a very moving experience to be here. And my neighbor Yo-Yo Ma's here every summer, or at least it used to be. So it's a very special place. And it's an honor to be here with David Blight, whose biography of Frederick Douglass is stunningly brilliant. David gave me a rare pleasure, which was he shared the rough drafts of each chapter of his monumental magisterial biography with me, and I read every word avidly, and on the weekends and Sunday I would send him all my comments, fire down.
I got up on Sundays in terror.
I said, why don't you talk about all the affairs he had? You don't have to apologize for him, you know, whatever. And we had a lot of really good back and forth. It was a great honor for me, and very cleverly, halfway through, it occurred to me that this guy was going to win the Pulitzer Prize. And maybe it would be good to negotiate the documentary rights right now before he won the Pulitzer, which I did. So we were nominated for an Emmy for Frederick Douglass in 5 speeches. And it's on HBO, you can watch it anytime. And we're also going to do a long-form biography. HBO doesn't do biographies of Douglass on PBS. So we'll be working together for a long, long time. And the book that he's writing is about James Weldon Johnson, who is one of my heroes. James Weldon Johnson was truly the Renaissance man of the Harlem Renaissance. There's never been anybody in the tradition who was so multi-talented, such a genius over so many genres. And I've had a thing about Johnson for a very, very long time. And so he's in good hands with David Blight. David, so give it up to David Blight. David, what was the version of the Civil War and Reconstruction you were taught growing up in Michigan?
Oh my. I was taught by a woman named Mildred Hodges. She was my American history high school teacher.
Just 11th grade?
11th.
11th grade.
I have no memory of learning anything about slavery, at least not vividly. I'm sure it got mentioned. Mildred taught history. I still call her Mildred.
You're not supposed to call your teacher by first name?
Miss Hodges.
That's right.
She reminded us once a week that she had studied with Richard Hofstadter at Columbia.
Whoa.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, we know, Mildred, you studied. But she taught everything as causes and consequences. That I learned. I mean, I didn't know until later what she was really doing. That was valuable. But race, slavery, it really wasn't part of. I was in high school in the 60s. And I didn't really learn much black history until college, and at Michigan State in either 68 or 69, I took the first ever black history course, taught at MSU. It was taught by a man named Les Rout, who was African American, but he was a Brazilianist. He was a Latin American historian, and I suspect they said,
"You're black,
Les.
You're black. You can teach.
You teach black history tomorrow."
That's the way it was back then.
Oh, but it was amazing. It was all new. It was incredible. Probably encountered Douglass in that course, but I don't remember reading the narrative yet. It was while I was a high school teacher that I first began. We were all creating in the 1970s. We were all creating a course called Black History without knowing what we were doing, and it's then that I really began to cultivate, but not in high school.
But why were you taking that course at Michigan State anyway?
Because I thought it was fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
It was 1968 or 69,
mm-hmm.
which is almost the answer in itself.
Mm-hmm. The Wild West days of revolution.
Well, it was civil rights. It was Vietnam. It
Mm-hmm.
was something called the Second Reconstruction.
Mm-hmm, right.
Why would they call it that?
Right.
I think we read Strange Career of Jim Crow,
mm-hmm.
where Van Woodward called it the Second Reconstruction.
Mm-hmm.
I always found that kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What was the first Reconstruction? I learned nothing about Reconstruction
mm-hmm.
until after high school and probably after college. I don't know what that says, except that history then was taught as a rather linear narrative of American progress.
Mm-hmm.
So it was actually as a high school teacher that I began to cultivate a much more, not that I was doing it well by any means, but a much more critical view of American history.
There are not many high school teachers of American history who end up winning 5 or 6 prizes for their biography of Frederick Douglass. Tell us about that journey. Did it take you a while to realize that you wanted to be an academic?
Yes, absolutely. I had no relatives who went to college,
mm-hmm.
except one uncle. He had an agriculture degree from Michigan State. But I had an older brother who became an academic, is a genius, and is a major scholar of the Cold War and Vietnam and Cuban Missile Crisis and many other subjects. You look him up, James Blight. He was my model. But it was seriously, as a high school teacher, teaching for 7 years, that I began to realize, hey, maybe I can do this beyond teaching, as well as teaching. And I did a master's degree in history, 1 course at a time, part-time, 3.5 years to do it, in history, while I was teaching high school.
Where was this?
Flint, Michigan.
Wow.
That's where I grew up. So it was a process for me. I teach kids today who want to go to graduate school when they're 22.
Mm-hmm.
Fine, if they're ready.
Mm-hmm.
I do remind them that I wasn't.
Right.
But it was a process. It was a longer process. And it was writing long-term papers for my master's degree and just spending, it was mostly weekends, in a library and an archive that I began to realize, man, this might be cool. And I had an older brother who was doing it in another field.
Mm-hmm.
And then I thought, what the hell, I'll give it a shot.
Well, my older brother's an oral surgeon. I'm glad I didn't follow that path. A very distinguished oral surgeon.
Well, okay. Well, yeah, you know. You did all right, too.
Yeah, I did all right. But I was raised to be a medical doctor.
Uh-huh.
You know, for my mother, Pauline Augusta Coleman Gates, God rest her soul, in heaven there was a Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, and a medical doctor. She wanted 2 boys. And when I finally got my PhD, my brother and I would arrange to go home for Thanksgiving and Christmas at the same time with our little families. And somebody from the hospital would call for my brother, and they'd say, "Could I speak to Dr. Gates?" And she'd say, "Which one?" So she still got that kick. Tell me about your discovery of, oh, by the way, I took my very first course in Afro-American history in 1969, 1970 at Yale University, when the subject was just being born. Not that Negro history, as it was called, before Afro-American history had not been taught, because of course it had been taught.
You took it from Bill, right?
Yeah, from William McFeely. And I fell in love with it. But so we took it about the same time.
Same year, probably.
And we read The Strange Career of Jim Crow.
Right.
And McFeely gave a brilliant lecture about the end of the Second Reconstruction. When Carswell and, when Nixon was doing those spurious nominations for the Supreme Court. I'll never forget that. It's at the Yale Law School.
That hasn't ended either.
Yeah, no, it ended, then it came back. But how has researching and writing about Frederick Douglass for decades now shaped your understanding of, first, the Civil War, and secondly, American history generally?
Well, wow. Well, my first book was my dissertation. It's a study of the meaning of the Civil War in Douglass's life. It's essentially intellectual history. I was interested in the ideas. It's through Douglass and through those years and reading all the new history that you know, the 1970s was the revolution in slavery scholarship into the 80s. That emancipation became the center of the story. The Civil War was about much more than blue versus gray and North versus South and restoring the Union. It was about a revolution. It was a second American Revolution. And some historians were already calling it that.
And they were calling the American Revolution the Civil War.
Exactly, especially in the South.
Right.
Less so maybe in New England. But it was the emancipation story, the abolition story, that became central to understanding the Civil War. And that may seem obvious now, but it was not obvious in 1950s, even 60s scholarship. Abolitionists had undergone a revolution in their reputation by the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, they were often not only
blamed for it.
Not only were they depicted as crazy, the images of them chosen for textbooks saw them as crazy. I mean, they would have wild hair and wild eyes, and they were extremists and did things like attack federal arsenals and.
Well, some of them were extremists.
You're right.
Yeah, and part of William Lloyd Garrison's shtick was to get audiences angry and throwing things at them as long as they weren't lethal. Yeah, I mean, it was the emancipation story. And in my first work on Douglass, what drew me to Douglass was, well, first of all, I would have done my dissertation on a person you know well, a man named James McCune Smith, probably the best educated African American of the 19th century.
He had 3 degrees from the University of Glasgow.
Right.
In the 1830s, and was a medical doctor and Douglass's best friend.
Douglass's best?
And like Douglass, mixed race.
Mixed race, Douglass's best African-American friend. They were alter egos. Smith was everything Douglass wasn't. Douglass was everything. Smith wasn't a great orator, but a majestic writer, often under pseudonyms. I was going to do my dissertation on Smith, but the sources just weren't that extensive, as you know. There were about 30 surviving letters. There were lots of essays, and now there are even more we know about because of John Stauffer's work.
Right.
Had there been enough on Smith, I might not have even done a book on Douglass.
I hope you still do one on Smith. He's one of my heroes. Really.
Actually, John is.
Oh, he is?
Well,
for one of my series. Yeah, I forgot.
It's our series. We signed him up.
That's right.
Right.
We
co-edit series.
We do. I have 2, but we co-edit a series on Black lives for the Yale University Press.
Right. Well,
Black biographies.
John Stauffer of Harvard is doing a short biography of James McCune Smith. But in Douglass, what I'm certain now in retrospect, what drew me was the language. I'm not sure I understood that at the time because I don't think I had the talent yet to analyze the language. But if you read enough Frederick Douglass, read any Frederick Douglass, you will probably keep reading him. He was a prose poet. Whether it's in the short form editorials or the long form, a long form autobiography like his masterpiece, My Bondage and My Freedom, the second autobiography, or the hundreds and hundreds of speeches. He overused adjectives, but everybody in the 19th century overused adjectives. But the majesty of his prose just keeps you, attracts you, draws you. He takes you somewhere. And there's always been a little mystery to this, but I think that's what kept drawing me to him, was how could he do this? No formal education, et cetera, et cetera. How did he gain this?
Total autodidact.
Yeah, and well, he was not without learning, as we both know, but that came only with time. But I was always interested in the Civil War. I wanted to write about something that was about the meaning of the Civil War and not just the fighting of it. I wanted to treat this event, and many scholars were at that. George Frederickson was sort of first to this, and then there were many others beginning to treat the Civil War era as an age in which ideas were transformed. The law was transformed. The Constitution was transformed. The meaning of the United States was transformed. And there's nobody to see that through better than Douglass. He actually, I think, conceived of himself as a kind of founding father of the Second American Republic. I mean, you can say Lincoln is too, and there are others, John Bingham, who wrote the 14th Amendment. But Douglass always, he lived long enough. You know, the Civil War comes in Douglass's life when he's in his 40s.
Yep.
He's one of those rarest of things, a radical reformer who lives to see his cause triumph. I mean, it won. Slavery is destroyed. The United States is remade. And in the 5 to 6 years after the war, he fully believed that. But then he's also going to live long enough, all the way to 1895, to see it essentially betrayed.
He actually wrote an essay saying that he had lost his subject.
Yeah.
And what good was he? He had no use. He had lost his voice because
the congregation is gone.
Yeah, slavery disappeared. So you read it and you go, just hang around, Fred. You know, give it 6 years.
Actually, he did, in the third autobiography, which is, of course, in retrospect, backward, from 1881, he remembers the end of the war. I mean, it's so Douglass. When he needed support, he needed language, it was usually the Bible or Shakespeare.
And not bad to
No,
text
and he knew his texts. Oh, did he? But he quoted as part of the soliloquy in Othello. Othello's occupation is gone. I have lost my steeds. I've lost my army. Well, he loved that play for reasons that are not hard to understand. But anyway, the language with Douglass, and then his centrality at this transformation of the United States as the black voice telling the country and telling the world what it meant. That's how I got to Douglass. But I had Douglass out of my life after various other things I did on him until I encountered a private collection of Douglass manuscripts about 16 years ago now with a collector in Savannah, Georgia.
Did he contact you?
Sort of, yes. I went to Savannah to give a talk to middle and high school teachers about Douglass's narrative, which we've both done many times. And my host there says, there's a local collector here, he'd like to have lunch. Okay, collectors, right? Oh my God.
Yeah.
His name is Walter Evans. He took me over to his house after lunch. African-American retired surgeon who made a very good living as a surgeon, but plowed his fortune into collecting African-American manuscripts, rare books, and art. And he had almost all of it at that point in his beautiful 4-story brownstone in Savannah. And that day, he got out on his dining room table a portion of his Douglass collection. And I didn't decide right away, as I've told you. Oh, God, I don't want to do this. Somebody's got to do a new biography now. Oh, my God, I don't want to do this. And Wendy Strothman, my agent, who is here today and helped organize this, said, David, you're doing a new biography.
Yeah.
You did. And I did. So.
Thank God.
And that collection, I'm happy to say, it took a long time because Walter's a hell of a businessman. It's now at the Beinecke Library at Yale, and all digitized.
That's great. That's wonderful.
So you can all use it if you want.
Let's start with Obama. How do you think the Obama years shaped the way that you see the history you teach?
Oh my. Well, I can still remember Election Day. I went from my lecture course, I can't remember which lecture it was in the Civil War Reconstruction course, down to where they had TV set up so we could watch the inaugural and so on. Not Election Day, inaugural day.
It was cold, man.
Oh, well,
I was there. It was freezing.
Yeah. Well, look, hope is a cliche, especially now. But Obama's election taught a lot of us that tremendous change can occur in history. It can shock us. It can shock us for the better, and it doesn't take too long before it can shock us for worse. I found in Obama also a wordsmith. The guy is a wordsmith. And I saw a lot of Douglass in some of his speeches, less explicit than Lincoln and King. He would explicitly use Lincoln and King, but there are whole passages that are from Douglass. And it's one of the reasons I start the preface of my biography by quoting President Obama from his dedication speech at the African American Museum, where he said, I wish I could directly quote it, but he said, "We see," this is Obama dedicating the Black History Museum, in the first paragraph. Now, this may have been a speechwriter's idea, maybe it's his, but he said, "We see our history through the leonine gaze of Frederick Douglass." And when I heard him say that, preface, thank you, President Obama. I'm right up front, man. And it's how I got to meet Obama. You know, he read it.
Sure, of course. Oh, well, how could we help us understand something everyone in this playhouse has contemplated? Something quite puzzling. How could we go from a republic at its best, the election of the first African American, a very superior person, to a republic at its worst, the election of Donald Trump, who was clearly not suited to be the president of the United States?
Well, there are a lot of ways to answer that, and of late, as you well know, historians have been asked, at least in my lifetime, we've been asked this question more times in the last 5 years than we've ever been asked about anything.
Of course.
Because everyone's puzzled. One of my favorite writers ever is Robert Penn Warren. And Warren never stopped writing about the Civil War for his own reasons. He once said, "The Civil War still lays around in the brush in America like unexploded grenades. Be careful where you step." Warren was brilliant at metaphors, as all good writers are. So, and I'd have to also add, despite how much we want to believe it, the arc of history does not always bend toward justice. In fact, I got tired of hearing that. Because look at history. Tell the Russians and the Ukrainians that history always bends toward justice.
Tell 6 million Jews.
Yeah. Or even the Germans. I mean, the German sense of history is much more deeply tragic than American, because they know the arc of justice, arc of history has funny ways to bend. We're shocked by history because we're not ready for it, and it's no one's fault in particular. But we're shocked by it because, well, for one thing, we don't know enough of it. But even historians are shocked. Historians were shocked by Trump's election. Historians are shocked by 9/11. Historians were shocked by January 6th. Who wasn't? I couldn't believe I was seeing this. Historians were shocked by the collapse of communism. Talk about a turning point in history. Who predicted the end of the Cold War? There's a few diplomatic historians who'll tell you about an article they wrote at such and such, but who predicted it? We're terrible at knowing what's coming. And we're not as good at understanding backlashes, reactions, the history of reaction. And God knows Reconstruction is ultimately the history of reaction, redemption. We're not as good at understanding reactions as we are sometimes these triumphal turning points. Who wouldn't rather tell their children about a triumphal turning point than a horrible reaction where it gets betrayed? Oh, my child, let me tell you all the betrayal in history. That's not what people want their kids to learn. Well, until they're maybe a certain age, and now we got a lot of parents who don't think they should ever learn about that because it's a divisive subject or concept. So, you know, well, first of all, we got to remember Trump didn't win the popular vote, but We have a structure, a constitutional structure. You all know this. We have a constitutional structure for our elections that makes this possible over and over and over. So there are structural reasons that Trump happened, but there are also historical reasons.
Well,
when you trace back and look at where all this populism comes from, and where the racism comes from, and where the authoritarian comes from, this is an old thing in America.
But let's talk about that. Did your grounding as a scholar help you see the ascendancy of the alt-right, of Donald Trump, during or after Obama, before most people, or did this surprise you? You know, when did you, I saw it the night watching CNN when they counted the votes. But I have to say that I gave a speech on Martha's Vineyard that summer. I'm from a paper mill town in eastern West Virginia, halfway between Pittsburgh and Washington. Very much like this, in the Allegheny Mountains on the Potomac River. And whenever I come here, I think about home. It's how I grew up. You know, I grew up with first day of deer season was a holiday, hunting and fishing. When you're 12, you got a 410. You know, that's the way it is. And squirrels, rabbits, deer. I never liked to shoot anything, but I love to fish. And
You're describing Michigan right now. You are.
And every year, there's 7 women called the princesses, who Geraldine Brooks right there. Give it up for Geraldine Brooks, ladies and gentlemen. Geraldine's new novel, Horse, we did a fundraiser for the Martha's Vineyard Equine Learning Center, which I lease for 2 months every summer. And we did this event. So I had to read her book in order to interview her, right? And it's brilliant. I encourage you to get that book. It's got prizes written all over it. It's a work of genius. But every year, there are these 7 women and a combination, at least 4 or 5. Every year they come and stay with my wife and me for 4 days. And you know what we have in common? We met on the last day of August of 1956, on the first day of first grade. And we were in school for 12 years, and we're best friends. Isn't that amazing? 6 white girls and a black girl. Not that many black people in West Virginia, period, and especially where I grew up. Glad I got a laugh out of it over there. And they called me Skippy, and that's what my mom called me, Skippy. And they said, Skippy, all but the black girl, Donald Trump, we want you to know, and I know, they love me, I love them. They are not racist at all, but they voted for Donald Trump. And I gave that speech on the Vineyard, and I said, my best friends are here, and they're working class. Their parents and my father worked in the paper mill together, and they are alienated, they're afraid, the world has changed, they have no grounding, and they see Donald Trump as a savior. And if we're not careful, I said this on the Vineyard in August before the election, Donald Trump's going to win. And people thought I was ridiculous, right? And I was right. Only because these people I trusted, and when I looked them in the face, first I said, get out of town, you know, or get out of my house. I wanted to sit down. But then I thought about it, and when you're afraid, you don't assuage someone's fears by telling them they're stupid, telling them they're ugly, that their ideas are ugly, that their beliefs are un-American or not palatable. You just alienate them more.
You still talking to them?
We're best friends, man. They voted for Donald Trump twice. And they were right. I mean, Donald Trump was elected.
Well,
so when did you, so why?
I don't take any high ground here. I thought he was going to lose.
I know, but, and you were wrong. But why do you think, now in retrospect, now you're writing history? You can't write history before it happens, but once it happens, then it's history, right?
Well, no, there are a lot of reasons.
So what, just slow down a minute. Was there a cause and what is the cause and effect relationship between 8 years of Obama and the election of Donald Trump?
Well, the Republican Party was organizing to thwart first, and then defeat whatever Obama managed to create the morning after he was elected. And actually, I wrote a piece once called The Theft of Lincoln. It's in Eric Foner's little book of essays on Abraham Lincoln that I think we did in about 2008 or something. And I went back through the Republican Party modern history, and now there's a lot of really good books on the modern Republican Party out there. But it was just an article. I went back through the Bush years, George W., and even further back to Reagan, to trace where Republican ideas on race really had come from. And
contemporary ideas.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. And especially voter suppression. Voter suppression, as we know it now, is not brand new, folks, as I'm sure you know. It was created on steroids in the Bush Justice Department, run by John Ashcroft. They had a whole group of lawyers in the Justice Department, the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department, trying to find voters a fraud that they couldn't find. So there were ideas there to be tapped. If somebody came along with this kind of populist appeal, this kind of say it out loud racist anger. Plus he appealed obviously to class, to the alienation of the Midwestern worker, to the hatred of NAFTA. But one quick thing, I too, I don't want to tell you the whole story here, but I won't. But I have cousins in Michigan who vote for Trump. They're farmers. They're brilliant. I have two cousins. They're both about my age. They went to Michigan State, same time I did. They majored in ag. They became master breeders. They own 2,000 acres. They raised 600 cattle and God knows 800 hogs. And they're dyed-in-the-wool Republicans because they hate government. I got in touch with my cousin Ken after the election. I was on a treadmill one day, about 10 days after the election. I don't know, I'm in despair, and I thought, okay, I'm going to write to Ken. See if we can have a dialogue, like you're having with your best friend. Now, Ken and I have not been that close, but we've always had this incredibly respectful relationship. He admires what I do, and I have even more admiration for what he does. These guys are geniuses, what they can do. I mean, and I wrote to him and I said, hey, Ken, I know you probably voted for Trump. He did. He wrote back and he said, look, he wasn't my first choice, but that socialist Hillary Clinton, I can't. Right there, I knew we were going to have some difficulty. But anyway, long story short, I said, Ken, let's try something. Let's try to write an article together. You and I, our fathers are brothers. My dad went to the city and became a factory worker, and I became a teacher. Your dad was a big-time farmer, and you're a farmer. We come from the same people. We have very different politics. What if we wrote a piece about it? I said, I think I can get it in the Atlantic or someplace. Ken probably thought, ooh. But we started by writing a series of emails, remembering our youth and telling stories. And it was good. It was great for a while. And then it got hard. But I learned a lot. He said, calls me Cousin Dave, says, I get up at 5 a.m. every day. I only remember one family vacation in my life, because farmers don't get vacation. And he started telling me how hard it is from year to year to year. And I have visited there. I haven't been there now in 10 years. And I started telling him, you know, what my youth was like and so on and so forth. But then we started talking about real issues. And we suddenly realized, God, we see the world different. And we gave up on it.
Oh.
Now, the plan was I was going to go out to the farm, spend 3 days, put a pair of boots on, walk in his shoes. I told him, I'll be no use to you, but I'll walk in your shoes. But you got to come to Yale. You got to meet my colleagues and my students. You got to walk in my shoes.
Right.
And then we write the article.
He wouldn't do that?
No, he was keen to do it. But it fell apart when we started talking about issues. Everything from abortion to federal subsidies to urban policies.
But David, that's the point.
I know, I should have done it.
You got to go back, but it's not too late.
I gave up.
Tell him, ladies and gentlemen, shouldn't he do that? You should do this. You should do this. Give me I'll edit it.
All right.
Wendy and I,
It'd be the most important thing I probably
Wendy,
ever
I'll be the
wrote.
author. I'll be the author of that.
we
We
never-
make a lot of money on that book.
But we gave up because it was hard to talk to each other.
So what?
Well,
you're a professor at Yale, for Christ's sake.
All right.
No,
Well,
you
that
need
was
to
a
go
little
back
bit
to
of the problem.
No,
too.
you need to go back to that
Maybe
because that's Jacob and Esau, yin and yang, you know, what pick your metaphor. But that's, because, I mean, what makes it even better is that you're blood of my blood, flesh of my flesh. It's great.
Yeah, we were both really angry, though.
Yeah, but now you cooled off and
anyway.
Okay. Look, do me a favor.
But I don't
ask Wendy how much money in advance you can get. Then call the cousin and then ask him what he thinks.
Now you want it to be a book.
Yeah, well, it will be a book. It would be great. Listen,
anyway,
because we need, the question that he asked me was, and you all heard it, was I still speaking to my friends?
That's good.
I was a little bit surprised when you said that, because with the people I love, no, you don't need to apologize, because it was based on your experience with your cousin.
Yeah, kind of.
But with the people I love, and I say this unapologetically, there are no politics that could get in the way of the people I love. That's just the way it is. I'm not, I don't choose my friends by their politics. I don't think that I think one of the worst things that's happened in the American Academy is that we often have a litmus test for political beliefs before we judge colleagues, and it's just wrong. My ideal of the university is that we have people on the right, people in the center, people on the left, and it's a place of colloquy, a place where we can have open discourse and debate without demonization. That is the ideal of education that I want to embody. And I hate political correctness. Now, there are exceptions. I just watched Ken Burns, as much of it as I could, because it just tore me apart. Ken Burns' new magnificent series on American anti-Semitism, really. And I mean, if somebody was a Nazi, if they were in the Klan, you know, that would be too much. So I don't want you to think that I have no limits, but it would take somebody being that extreme for me to cut them loose.
Look, I agree, and I couldn't agree more about the Academy. The trouble is, we're up against, I mean, our ideal of the university, of schooling, of education, the function of it, is debate, is the colloquy. But that's not what we're up against politically. We're up against wedge politics. The Republicans, let's be honest, have practiced for decades, and they have found a new one. Critical race theory, poisoning the minds of youth, teaching them about slavery, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes being friendly with them won't solve this one.
No, that's true. No, you're right about that. But we have to keep as many channels open as we possibly can. And I just think
my college roommate's a Trump voter.
But you would be performing you would be performing a great service if you could figure out a way to resurrect that book with your cousin. That's all. I'm not going to beat you up anymore about that.
Yeah.
But do you think?
It'd be fun to go to the farm too.
Let me ask you a question that, you know, I keep. This is being asked widely in the press, and my reaction to it is generally that I'm reacting to hyperbole, but I'm not sure, so I'm going to ask you. Do you think that there's a real risk of another civil war?
Oh, well, yeah, you can't duck that question anymore, as I'm sure some of you have learned. I've learned that I have to have an answer to this one. No, not if, but it depends on what we mean by civil war. If we're talking about, if we're talking about civil conflict that may break out sometimes in street violence, that may break out sometimes in political violence, left and right. For example, what if these next two elections, 22 and 24, are really won by the right wing in America, and vast numbers of people who are Democrats or on the left, whatever that means, truly believe they were essentially stolen by voter suppression? What would a January 6th of the left look like? We don't want to know. I mean, and I don't know. Are we on the brink of some kind of civil conflict? Low intensity here and there, we're already there. Are we on the brink of dysfunctional institutions? Yes, we're there. Supreme Court, the U.S. Congress, Large parts of our public education system. The business model of public education isn't working. So at what point? Where are there tipping points? We don't know. We're terrible at predicting, as we said. What would a tipping point be with the Supreme Court? A second Hobbes decision, a third decision about states' rights, a second and third decision about voting rights, which Linda Greenhouse just wrote about brilliantly in The Atlantic. At what point will we not tolerate the destruction of the Voting Rights Act? Maybe we'll accept it. I don't know. So, but this idea that we're on the brink of some kind of civil war with the image of our real civil war in our minds, that doesn't work. That's not what'll. We are divided regionally to some extent, but not like we were in the 19th century. We're divided ideologically, and we're divided by rural and urban, and we're divided by conspiracy theories. But so was the 1850s. The 1850s was a time of roiling conspiracy theories from both sides. I'm not suggesting Democrats have to come up with matching conspiracy theories. Actually, we don't need them.
No, you don't need them.
The truth is much better right now.
That's true.
So that's how I try to handle this "Are we on the brink of a civil war?" question, which comes up about at least by the second question in everything I do now.
Yeah. So it wouldn't be. So let's imagine.
We're in the last question now, I think, according to our.
Oh, can I ask him a question? Or?
Please go ahead, and then we'll move on to audience questions. Thanks.
So, what would this? I'm trying to think what. The stock market plunged today.
And yesterday.
Right. So we're heading toward a recession. Trump's licking his lips, or for the next election. I mean, God forbid, but it's possible. So let's say that all that happens. What happens to America? Let's say a Donald Trump administration.
A second re-election of Trump?
Or a Trump-like person, a person more palatable personally, but ideologically akin.
I hate predicting, but it could be, maybe. Here is where what historians should do is keep reminding us of when in the past something like this has happened, or similar to it. The American political party system tore itself to pieces in the 1850s.
David has just written a 10,000-word piece for the Sunday Times Magazine that will be out, being edited now.
A few weeks,
It'll be out in a few weeks. So tell us about that. Was my last question.
But also the Great Depression, the 30s, transformed American party politics. The old Democratic Party was no more after 36, after 40, after 1944, after the Dixiecrats, especially in 44. The old Republican Party was already dying. So we've had transformations of the ideologies of our politics before. We've had 3 or 4 of them, actually. That's where it doesn't mean that's what's going to happen. Parallels are always loose, always loose. I personally find a second Trump presidency just terrifying.
Oh, me too.
Not just because it's him, because of all the damage already done structurally, the courts, putting people in the electoral process who are going to run it. And it seems to me that at some point, whatever we call the other side, liberals, the Democratic coalition, such as it is, will itself rebel. Now that's a country not functioning. It's a democracy not working. And especially if he or a DeSantis or anyone, if the next Republican president doesn't win the popular vote, when can we ever have a politics to destroy the Electoral College? Which was out of date the day after it was enacted. It might take. This is one of the things history does to you. It can make you a little dark because you realize the big changes you may want, they only came in the past under terrible circumstances. I always tell my students, you want a real political realignment? Would you prefer a civil war or a Great Depression?
Great Depression, right.
Which one?
Right.
neither. Or the 60s.
Well,
60s wasn't all pretty, you know. It wasn't
No,
all happy.
but for me, as a black man, you know, I think about there's the glories of the Civil War, and then Reconstruction. In 10 years, 16 black men go to Congress, two appointed to the United States Senate, and a zillion other marvelous things happened, and then it all came crashing down. So by 1900, it's all not only erased. 1901, the last black man, George Henry White, from North Carolina, left the House of Representatives. But then the narrative about it was an attempt to obliterate it. You know, it unwrote the triumphs that black people and their white allies achieved together in Reconstruction and made it an example, an embodiment of the worst era in the history of democracy. So not only were their actions obliterated, but that they didn't even have a good story that could be told about it until historians like David came along decades and decades and decades later. That's what I worry about. That all of the rights that we've gained because of the civil rights, we, African Americans, have gained because of the civil rights movement, and women in this room, women in this country should be worried as well, as we saw in the recent decision about abortion. Yeah, that we could be just driven back to another horrible time when different forms of racism, certainly not as blatant as they were before the modern civil rights movement, but different forms of racism become a way of life once again. And that is worth fighting against, without a doubt.
Oh my God, so well put. Thank you, guys. We're going to open it up for a few audience questions now. I think we have time for just a few.
Thank you,
so much to think about, so much to question. So I see somebody up there.
Yes, hi. It's a question for Professor Gates. I'm curious, when your friends said that they were afraid, that they voted for Trump because they were afraid, did you ask what it is they're afraid of?
Yes.
Did everyone hear the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, when Skip's friends said they were afraid, did they say what they were afraid of?
Hopelessness. They were afraid there was no hope, that there would never be hope again. That we were all raised that if we worked hard, remember I was born in 1950, we worked hard, and in our town, you know, your father, only fathers, well, pretty much, by and large, worked hard at the paper mill, then you would go to high school, you would work hard, and then you'd go to college, 2 years at the junior college, then you go to the university, West Virginia University, and you come back then as an engineer in the paper mill. Then you get own your own home, and you'd have a couple cars or a car in the truck, and you'd get a color TV, and then your kids would go to college. That there was an unbroken arc of progress, economic progress, ever increasing degrees of security, equity, a purchase in the system, and that's over. That's what they were afraid of. And you know what? They were right. That is over for a lot of people.
Okay, thank you. Somebody right there in the middle, thanks.
Yes, Professor Gates, you asked Dr. Blight a question early on about his high school education.
Yes, sir.
Whether that would be learned about Black history.
Mm.
The issue that I see with regards to the issues of the Black history, the Holocaust, the Native Americans, is that they're not being taught in our schools at all,
Mm-hmm.
and not adequately at least. And how do we move that forward in some way? Because I think that has a great deal to do with how people think today, is based on what they've learned in school.
Well, absolutely.
So thanks. So the question is, we don't have enough history of Native Americans, and tell me that you heard the question. Skip if I'm getting this wrong. Native Americans, blacks, Jews, you know, we in our school system, women in our school systems, and what can we do to fix that?
Mm-hmm. Well, with full respect, sir, Are you sure? Because I've spent 25 and more years running teacher institutes in the summer, secondary teachers. I've worked with, I guess, thousands. They're teaching a great deal of Black history now. Not everybody. The books aren't all fabulous. They're teaching a good deal of women's history. They're enthralled with Native American history. The Holocaust, some teachers will tell you, is overtaught. Now, that depends on where they are. But I do think we need to be careful. Tremendous things have changed in school curriculums. Believe me, if you can.
Even in Texas?
Well, no, Texas is another problem. I got a call. Actually, Eric Foner and I were on a phone call with an African-American woman who's on the State Board of Education in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
She dialed up some historians she happened to know about. And she asked us to get on the phone with her because she's trying to figure out what to do in answering the legislature's demands about curriculum, which were horrible.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the trouble was she needed a political strategy, not a historical strategy.
Right.
And Eric and I both told her, we do politics, but not this kind.
Have you been banned? Have you been banned?
Have I been banned?
Yeah.
Not that I'm aware of.
I have, in Texas.
All right.
One of my books.
All right.
Yeah.
Hey. Well, our textbook, our textbook, the textbook I'm on with other authors, The People in a Nation, got banned for its LGBT content. Not banned, but it was not selected again when it was up to be selected.
No, I was banned.
It was banned.
But you know what was banned? A chronology of African American. All it is a list of dates, annotated list of dates from the first Black man to come to Florida, Juan Garrido in 1503, down to Barack Obama, and they banned that. I don't think they read it. You know, I just said they picked. You know,
There are a lot of books they're banning that they haven't read.
Yeah,
it's
I'm
true.
sure.
And,
But I just
mean,
want to make
yeah.
sure there are thousands of really good teachers in this country who are doing heroic work, and a lot of them want to quit. And at Yale in early November, my center is running a conference on the huge topic of teaching race and slavery in the American classroom, and we're showcasing teachers.
Yes, but that gentleman's question, though, I mean, where we live in the most liberal state in the union, other than California, right? But what about? I mean, what is your opinion? This is just an extension of his question about what we might think of as.
We're going to make him right and wrong.
What you might think of as disequilibrium in terms of the progress being made.
Yeah.
I mean, yes,
Yeah.
at the best, the people who are coming to Yale at the Gilder-Lehrman are not the people teaching in Texas.
No. I'm not basing this on the kids who come to Yale or the teachers. The teachers come from all corners of the country.
Okay.
They come from everywhere.
Even from Alabama, Mississippi, and all these places.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They come from everywhere. Now, they're still self-selected.
Well, that's.
I know they are. They are. They're all over the place.
The teachers are great, but the problem is you've got
And I'm
these
bringing
laws.
teachers from Florida to our conference who, in effect, have been told what to teach and are just begging for help. You know, there's no simple way to help them, except this is a political problem. And we really got to get our heads around that.
Yes, but
academics aren't always very good at it.
No, that's true. But what we are facing is an unequally educated populace.
Oh.
And by that, I don't mean just the difference between Exeter or Andover and some rural school in,
Actually,
where I'm from.
You know, my first reaction to Trump's election the next morning, God, have we failed?
Uh-huh. Well, no question.
I felt like all my life I've been teaching American history. We're total failures.
But we're going to have some people in the population who know about women's rights and Native American experience and the Holocaust and the history of race, and then other people who are deniers of it.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I even had
They're
a
always
student
wounded, by the way.
at Harvard in my graduate seminar in the English department, one of the finest English departments in the world. She happened to be African American. She also was very religious, as you'll see. And this is in April, and in passing, I said something like, how do you learn about allegory and metaphor? I said, well, when I was 12, I joined the church, but then I switched from my mother's church to the Episcopal church, my father's church, when I was 14, because I realized that I was worshiping with people who didn't understand the metaphorical or allegorical nature of the Bible, the Hebrew Bible. They actually believed the world was created in 7 days, or that it rained 40 days and 40, whatever. And we all had masks on, right? And I felt this weird thing, and I looked at her, and she said, "You don't believe the world was created in 7 days?" It's at Harvard. So what would you have done? What would you have done, Dr. Blight?
And this is the last thing, because I'm so sorry. Does everybody want to stay here another hour? Not you guys. But I think we should wrap it up.
But what would you have done?
Well, I wouldn't have embarrassed her in front of the class.
I didn't. That's what my first instinct was, not to do that.
No, never do that. I probably would have tried to say, maybe we could chat after class or sometime. If you want to, I'm available. Sorry?
Well, let him finish his sentence.
Well, that's it. I would just not have embarrassed her in front of students.
You know what? We really have to end it. I'm getting the cut. So I'm really sorry. We could talk forever. I mean, I have 1,000 questions. I would love to, but I would like David to answer, and then we're going to end. Okay?
Well, I mean, if
I did.
But
I want to hear about voting rights.
We can talk later.
I don't mind hearing. We don't mind that one question about voting rights. Is that all right?
Well, I would love to talk about voting rights, but I'm literally getting. No. Yeah, I know. We are. We're about to have a revolution. And hold on. That was John's comment. I haven't even gotten my questions in yet.
Go ahead.
I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding.
Are you going to let her ask her question?
I'm going to let you ask your question.
All right,
Lynn's going to kill me, but go ahead and then
that'll be it.
That'll be it, okay?
Mm-hmm.
All Asians were excluded from being able to enter the country, and then they were denied citizenship.
Right.
Then they were denied the right to buy land, and then they were denied the right to lease land, and eventually they were all.
Did you have a question there?
Yeah. Well, we kind of got it. Well,
okay.
But let us both take a crack on that, and then we'll be done.
Okay.
I'll tell you what the biggest surprise about Reconstruction to most people, and David and I lectured about Reconstruction all over. I made a documentary about Reconstruction, and David figures prominently. The biggest surprise was this. For me, the black men nationally got the right to vote with the ratification of the 15th Amendment, which I believe is in April of 1870, okay? However, black men in the South, where 90% of all black people lived until 1910, the people in the former Confederacy, black men in the South got the right to vote, to register to vote in the summer of in March of 1867, and they registered in the summer of 1867, and they actually voted overwhelmingly in the elections of 1868. So formerly enslaved black men actually got the right to vote in the South because of federal troops and the Reconstruction policy before free black men in the North. The only place that black men in the free North could vote, 5 of the 6 New England states, not Connecticut, but the other 5, and New York, if they satisfied a $250 property requirement. Yeah. Not in New Jersey, not in Pennsylvania, not in Ohio, not nowhere, as we say. That's amazing. That is amazing. So that even the liberal North, to reaffirm your point, denied black men the right to vote until the federal government intervened. Go ahead, David.
Ma'am, could I suggest, though, that today's issue with voting rights, which has deep historical roots, in my view, is less about citizenship than it is about voter suppression, and the myriad ways that at least one political party in America has designed to prevent certain groups of people from voting.
Well, starting with the Mississippi Plan in 1890.
Right. It goes way back, and we need to figure out how we're going to solve this problem. I mean, really. All the good minds in here. So.
She's a mother.
Yeah, this was amazing.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, buddy.
Okay.